Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, I'll say from the outset that the Labor Party will support the bill to select committee because unlike that member who's just spoken, who is orbiting a stratosphere that very few New Zealanders have been on, who proved how out of touch she is, we believe there is a problem. We believe there is a deficiency. We commend the Green Party for bringing this bill to the chamber. However, we do agree that there are some difficulties with the bill, but they could well be addressed in select committee. We do agree, for instance, and Labor drafted before the last election what we would consider a pretty robust and tailor-made piece of legislation. I'd have to say to the Green colleague, congratulations in respect of the bill, but I think there are some substantial weaknesses in it. There are no, for instance, there is no penalty regime in here. The adjudicator is empowered to simply investigate, and if they can't resolve the issue, as I understand it from the bill, they can require the minister to invoke his powers under the Act to invite an inquiry. We set out in our code of conduct, and we have a code of conduct already drafted in a piece of legislation. We have a penalties regime where the adjudicator should have the power to investigate, to publicise information, but to render also penalties. So we would say we will support it to select committee. There are some difficulties, I think, also in terms of exclusions. Supermarkets, for instance, my partner tells me, Jane, have a major area of cosmetics, for instance. They are excluded from this piece of legislation. They are subject to market power, as are pharmaceuticals, as are tobacco, as are greeting cards, as are gardening equipment. A number of those issues, I think, need to be refined and addressed. I just say, so we'll support it to select committee, but I just say in the brief call I've got to the member opposite, obviously the National Party purports itself to be a friend of business. So Ms Lee says she has a choice when she goes to the grocer's shop or the fishmonger or whatever. Obviously she's never come across, for instance, an entity of people called tomato growers. Tomato growers, and the member from down south, where my old man's family come from, doesn't understand either. So tomato growers were told by progressives, for instance, at a certain point in time, we will buy your tomatoes for X price. Tomato growers went there and said, well, actually, X price is less than what we can produce for. The answer was, well, son, if you want to be on the shelves next year, that's the deal. And as a result, many of those market gardeners, certainly down in Canterbury and other places, have gone out of business. If you actually read some of the submissions to the Commerce Commission, you would argue there is a difficulty here. The UK, for instance, has a very robust piece of legislation. They have far more grocery chains than New Zealand does. And they believe there is a difficulty, there is a problem, it does warrant an adjudicator. They have a slightly strange system where the adjudicator can recommend penalties but then has to get a minister to sign them off, which I find is quite strange. We would argue that the adjudicator, well, I think the costs are, we established about $500,000, $750,000 a year. So the so-called massive cost that's going to be visited on the consumer as the industry pays for it, as that member purports, is bunkum. She hasn't done a research, she hasn't done a homework. We would also say that an adjudicator would be part of the Commerce Commission bureaucracy and would have the right cost recovery to use the investigative personnel and staff of the Commerce Commission rather than creating, as that member seems to think, some sort of duplication. These are suggestions that we may put to the Green member if it makes it to select committee to improve the bill. But the National Party simply says there is not a problem, we will do nothing about it, we're a friend of the big end of town, and I wonder what they say to all the suppliers, sir, down in Wallace and Gore and Invercargill, down the young fellas' way, sir, who have been royally done over. Royally done over, sir.
Order. Member will resume his seat. Members are not to be addressed in that ageist manner. Clayton Cosgrove. Order. Order. Was that you, Jonathan Coleman, who made that comment? Stand, withdraw and apologise.
Yes, sir. I withdraw and apologise.
That's okay, I'm only 46, younger than you, mate. Anyway, as I was saying before, I was interrupted by by the father of the house, I suspect.
Order. Right. Member's speech is terminated. Next speaker.